8-year-old Maya lay at the bottom of the stairs, bruised and trembling, while her bullies laughed from above. "Stay away from our school, charity case," they sneered. But what these wealthy students didn't know was that the quiet girl in worn-out shoes was actually the secret heir to a tech empire worth billions. And someone had been recording everything. The sound of laughter echoed through the marble hallway as Maya's small body tumbled down the grand staircase. Her books scattered across the cold floor, pages fluttering like wounded birds. She lay there, 8 years old and trembling, as the 3 girls who pushed her stood at the top, sneering down at their handiwork. "Stay away from our school, charity case," Jessica, the ringleader, called out mockingly. Maya's worn uniform and scuffed shoes made her an easy target at Riverside Prep, the most elite academy in the city. What her tormentors didn't know was that the quiet girl they just assaulted carried a secret worth billions. Her late grandmother, Margaret Chun, had been a tech industry pioneer who'd built an empire before quietly passing away 6 months ago. The will remained sealed, and Maya's guardian, her Uncle Robert, had insisted she live a normal childhood until her 18th birthday, when everything would be revealed. But normal had become a nightmare. The bruises on Maya's arms told stories she never shared with anyone. Pain shot through her left wrist as she tried to push herself up. A small crowd of students had gathered, some with their phones out, recording her humiliation for social media. Others simply watched with detached curiosity, the way people observe an accident on the highway. Not one person stepped forward to help her collect her scattered belongings. Maya's math textbook lay open, its spine cracked, near the bottom step. Her English essay, the one she'd spent 3 nights perfecting, had landed in a puddle of spilled coffee someone had carelessly left on the floor. Through blurred vision, Maya spotted her grandmother's silver locket among the debris. It had broken free from her neck during the fall, and now it gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, separated from its chain. That locket was the only tangible connection she had left to Margaret. Inside it was a tiny photograph of them together, taken during happier times when her grandmother would visit and tell her stories about building technology that changed the world. Margaret had never spoken about money or wealth. She talked about solving problems, helping people, and never letting anyone diminish her worth. Maya crawled forward, ignoring the throbbing in her knee, and closed her fingers around the locket. At least they hadn't taken this from her. She tucked it safely into her pocket, feeling its weight as both comfort and reminder. Her grandmother had faced boardrooms full of men who dismissed her ideas. She'd overcome poverty, discrimination, and countless obstacles to build something extraordinary. And here was Maya, her granddaughter, unable to even stand up to 3 cruel girls in a school hallway. The late bell rang, its shrill sound cutting through the remaining whispers. The crowd dispersed quickly, everyone suddenly remembering they had classes to attend. Maya finally managed to stand, testing her ankle carefully. It hurt, but she could walk. She began gathering her belongings with shaking hands, stuffing crumpled papers into her backpack. The coffee had ruined her essay completely, the blue ink running like tears across the page. She'd have to start over, assuming her teacher would even believe her explanation. As she reached for her last notebook, a shadow fell across the floor. Maya looked up, expecting another taunt, but instead found herself looking at a pair of polished dress shoes. They belonged to Mr. Hunt, the new history teacher who'd only started last month. He was young for a teacher, probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes that seemed to notice everything. Without a word, he bent down and picked up her geometry folder, handing it to her carefully. "Are you all right, Miss Williams?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying genuine concern rather than the pitying tone she'd grown to hate. Maya nodded quickly, not trusting her voice. If she spoke, she might cry, and she'd learned long ago that tears only made things worse. They gave the Jessicas of the world more ammunition, more reasons to call her weak and pathetic. Mr. Hunt's gaze shifted to the top of the staircase, where Jessica and her friends had finally disappeared. His jaw tightened slightly, and Maya noticed him glance toward a security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. Something flickered across his face, an expression she couldn't quite read, before his attention returned to her. "You should visit the nurse," he suggested gently. "That wrist needs to be looked at." From his office window, Principal Richard Morrison watched the incident unfold. His face remained expressionless as he reached for his phone, then stopped. The Chen family donated millions to this school. But this wasn't about the young Chen girl. The school didn't know who she really was. Robert had enrolled her under her mother's maiden name, Williams, to protect her identity. What Morrison didn't see was Alexander Hunt, the enigmatic new history teacher, standing in the shadowed corridor. At 32, Alexander was no ordinary educator. He was a private investigator hired by Margaret Chen's legal team months before her death. His mission: document any threats to Maya's safety and report back to the estate lawyers. He'd seen enough. The cameras he discreetly installed had captured everything. That evening, Alexander sat in his modest apartment, reviewing footage from the past 3 months. The bullying wasn't random. It was systematic. Jessica's mother sat on the school board. 2 other girls were daughters of business rivals who'd competed with Margaret Chen's company for decades. This wasn't childhood cruelty. This was calculated. Alexander paused the video, freezing on Jessica's face as she looked directly at the camera before pushing Maya. There was no fear of consequences in those eyes, only entitlement and cold satisfaction. He opened a separate file on his laptop, one containing detailed background checks on each of the girls involved. Jessica Whitmore's mother, Patricia, had been Margaret Chen's most vocal opponent during several board meetings. She tried to block the scholarship program 3 times, calling a waste of resources that could benefit students who truly belonged at Riverside Prep. The second girl, Amanda Pierce, came from a family whose pharmaceutical company had lost a major contract to Chen Industries 5 years ago. Her father had publicly blamed Margaret Chen for his company's declining stock prices, even threatening legal action that never materialized. The third girl, Sophie Lancaster, was the daughter of a venture capitalist who tried to force Margaret out of her own company during a hostile takeover attempt in the early 2000s. These weren't coincidences. These were the children of people who'd been defeated by Margaret Chen, now taking out their parents' resentments on an innocent child. Alexander clicked through more footage, his expression growing darker with each clip. October 15th, Jessica deliberately tripped Maya in the cafeteria, causing her to drop her lunch tray. The entire room had erupted in laughter while Maya sat in a puddle of soup, her face burning with shame. October 23rd, Amanda had stolen Maya's homework and turned it in as her own, then convinced the teacher that Maya was lying when she protested. Maya had received a 0 and a lecture about integrity. November 2nd, Sophie had started a rumor that Maya had lice, causing students to avoid her for 2 weeks until the school nurse finally examined her and found nothing wrong. But the pattern went deeper than simple bullying. Alexander pulled up his financial investigation files. Patricia Whitmore had been siphoning money from the Chun Foundation Scholarship Fund for nearly 3 years. Small amounts at first, easily hidden in administrative costs and program expenses. But as her confidence grew, so did the theft. She'd taken over $2 million, money meant to help students like Maya access quality education. The irony was crushing. Maya's own inheritance was funding the very program that was supposed to protect students from people like Patricia's daughter. Alexander had traced the money to offshore accounts and shell companies. Patricia had been clever, but not clever enough. She'd used some of the stolen funds to pay for Jessica's equestrian lessons, a European summer vacation, and a brand new luxury car for her 16th birthday last year. The paper trail was solid, and Alexander had documented every transaction. He'd also discovered something else during his investigation. Patricia had been pressuring Principal Morrison to eliminate the scholarship program entirely. She'd argued that it brought down the school's prestige and made other wealthy families reluctant to enroll their children. Morrison had resisted, partly because the Chun family's substantial donations depended on the program's continuation, but his resolve was weakening. Alexander opened another folder, this one containing email exchanges he'd obtained through legal channels. Patricia had been coordinating with Amanda's and Sophie's mothers, creating a united front of influential board members. Their strategy was simple: make life so miserable for scholarship students that they'd voluntarily leave. Without students to serve, the program would naturally collapse. Maya wasn't their only target. For other scholarship students had withdrawn from Riverside Prep in the past year, all citing personal reasons. Alexander had tracked them down and interviewed them. Each one had stories similar to Maya's: relentless bullying, social isolation, and targeted harassment. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. Margaret Chen had suspected something was wrong, which was why she hired him. She'd received anonymous letters from concerned parents, vague complaints about the hostile environment, but nothing concrete enough to act upon. So she'd asked Alexander to go undercover, to see the truth for himself. She'd wanted to protect Maya and reform the system before her granddaughter inherited everything. But Margaret had died before seeing the full extent of the corruption. Now it was up to Alexander to finish what she'd started. Maya returned home to the small apartment she shared with Uncle Robert, her body aching, but her spirit unbroken. Robert worked double shifts at a warehouse, unaware that he was actually managing an elaborate ruse. The real Robert Chen had been paid handsomely to play his role as guardian, while keeping Maya grounded and protected from the corrupting influence of wealth. "Rough day?" he asked gently, noticing her limp. "Just tripped," Maya lied, forcing a smile. She'd learned to protect others from her pain. Meanwhile, Alexander compiled his report. He discovered something disturbing. Jessica's mother, Patricia Whitmore, had been embezzling from the school's Chun Foundation Scholarship Fund, money specifically designated for underprivileged students. the same fund that supposedly provided Maya's financial aid. Patricia had been using her daughter to push away scholarship students, creating a pattern that would justify eliminating the program entirely. The pieces were falling into place. Margaret Chin's lawyers had suspected corruption, but needed proof. Maya's enrollment under an assumed name was the perfect test. Robert set down the newspaper he'd been reading and studied Maya more carefully. Despite her attempt at normalcy, he could see the way she favored her left side, the slight tremor in her hands as she set her backpack down. His weathered face creased with concern, but he'd learned not to push too hard. Maya was like her grandmother in that way, fiercely independent and protective of those she loved, even when she was the one who needed protection. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge," he said, switching to practical matters. "I heated it up for you. And before you ask, yes, I already ate." Maya felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Robert might not be her real uncle by blood, but his kindness was genuine. She didn't know that Margaret's lawyers had hired him specifically because of his own background. He'd lost his daughter to leukemia 5 years ago, a bright 8-year-old girl who would have been Maya's age now. The lawyers had chosen him not just for his acting ability, but for his capacity to truly care for a child who needed a father figure. She sat at their small kitchen table, the formica surface worn but clean, and picked at her pasta. The apartment was modest, just 2 bedrooms in a working-class neighborhood miles from Riverside Prep's Gilded campus. Margaret's instructions had been specific. Maya needed to understand how most people lived, to develop empathy and resilience that money couldn't buy. The apartment's thin walls meant Maya could hear Mrs. Rodriguez next door singing to her baby, and the smell of Mr. Kim's Korean cooking often drifted through the vents. This was real life, the kind her grandmother had known before building her empire. Robert pretended to read his newspaper, but watched Maya from the corner of his eye. He'd noticed the bruises accumulating over the past months, the way she'd grown quieter and more withdrawn. Part of him wanted to march into that fancy school and demand answers, but his instructions were clear. Maintain the facade, let Maya navigate her challenges, intervene only if her safety was truly at risk. It went against every protective instinct he'd developed, but he trusted that Margaret Chun had known what she was doing. "Your teacher called today," Robert mentioned casually. "Mr. Hunt said he wanted to discuss your progress in history class. Seemed real concerned about your well-being." Maya's head snapped up, surprise flickering across her face. Teachers didn't usually call home about scholarship students unless there was a problem. "What did he say?" "Just that he'd noticed you were having a hard time and wanted to make sure everything was okay at home. I told him we were doing fine, but that I appreciated his concern." Robert folded his newspaper, meeting her eyes directly. "Maya, if something's going on at school, you can tell me. I know I work a lot, but I'm here for you. That's what matters." Maya's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him everything. About Jessica's cruelty, about the daily humiliations, about how she dreaded walking through those school doors each morning. But what could Robert do? He was just a warehouse worker trying to make ends meet. Complaining would only make him feel helpless and guilty. She couldn't add to his burdens. "I know," she whispered. "Thank you, Uncle Robert." Across town, Alexander was on a video call with Margaret Chen's legal team. Sarah Chun, Margaret's niece and the lead attorney, listened intently as Alexander presented his findings. The conference room in her downtown office was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the modest apartment where Maya ate reheated pasta. "The evidence is comprehensive," Alexander explained, pulling up spreadsheets and video files on the shared screen. Patricia Whitmore has been systematically stealing from a scholarship fund while using her daughter as a weapon to drive away the very students the program was designed to help. We have documented incidents of bullying against 7 different scholarship students over the past 3 years. 5 have already left the school. Maya and 2 others remain. Sarah's expression hardened as she reviewed the materials. She'd loved her Aunt Margaret deeply and had sworn to honor her legacy. Seeing that legacy corrupted for personal gain ignited a cold fury within her. And Principal Morrison, he's been willfully blind, Alexander replied. Not actively participating in the corruption, but certainly turning a blind eye to keep his major donors happy. He's watched Maya get bullied repeatedly and done nothing. That makes him complicit. Sarah nodded slowly, her mind already formulating a strategy. Margaret wanted Maya to learn resilience, to understand struggle before inheriting wealth. But she never intended for her granddaughter to be abused. We need to move carefully. If we act too soon, Patricia and her allies will cover their tracks. But if we wait too long, Maya could be seriously hurt. There's something else, Alexander added, pulling up another file. I've been monitoring communications between Patricia and the other board members. They're planning to call for a vote next month to dissolve the scholarship program entirely. If that happens, Maya's cover will likely be blown during the investigation into why the program failed. Patricia has already started asking questions about the Williams family, trying to verify Maya's background. She's suspicious. 2 weeks after the staircase incident, an emergency school assembly was called. Students filed into the auditorium, whispering nervously. On stage sat representatives from Chen Industries, the school board, and several serious-looking people in expensive suits. Jessica and her friends sat smugly in the front row, believing their parents' influence made them untouchable. Then Maya walked onto the stage. The confusion in the auditorium was palpable. Why was the scholarship kid on stage with the board members? Attorney Sarah Chun, Maya's aunt and executor of Margaret's estate, stepped to the microphone. We're here to discuss the future of the Chun Foundation Scholarship Program and address serious allegations of fraud and abuse. The presentation began. Videos played. Every push, every cruel word, every incident of bullying against Maya and other scholarship students over the past 3 years. Alexander's investigation had uncovered everything. Then came the financial records showing Patricia Whitmore's embezzlement of over $2 million. Jessica's face drained of color. But there's something else you should know, Sarah continued, looking directly at Maya with warmth. The student you've been tormenting, Maya Williams, is actually Maya Chun, Margaret Chen's granddaughter and sole heir to the Chen fortune. The auditorium erupted. Gasps and exclamations ricocheted off the walls as hundreds of students turned to stare at Maya. Some phones emerged from pockets despite the no device policy, students desperately trying to capture this moment. Jessica's mouth hung open in disbelief, her usual composure shattered. Amanda and Sophie had gone pale, their eyes darting between Maya and the screen where their own cruel actions played on repeat for everyone to witness. Patricia Whitmore stood abruptly from her seat in the parents' section, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. I demand an explanation for these false accusations. Her voice carried across the stunned silence, but it trembled slightly, betraying her fear. Sarah remained calm, pressing a button on her remote. The screen changed to display bank statements, wire transfers, and meticulously documented financial records. These are not accusations, Mrs. Whitmore. These are facts, verified by 3 independent forensic accountants and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. You've been under investigation for 6 months. The color drained from Patricia's face as 2 federal agents stood from their seats near the back of the auditorium. They began making their way down the aisle, their presence sending a fresh wave of shocked murmurs through the crowd. Principal Morrison had slumped in his chair on stage, his career flashing before his eyes. He'd known something was wrong, had felt it in his gut, but had convinced himself that maintaining peace with the board was more important than investigating his suspicions. Now his cowardice was on full display. Sarah continued, her voice steady and professional. Margaret Chin established this scholarship program because she believed that talent and potential exist in every economic class. She herself came from poverty and understood the transformative power of education. What she didn't anticipate was that some people would see this generosity as a threat, something to be destroyed rather than celebrated. The screen shifted again, showing images of the 5 scholarship students who had left Riverside Prep over the past 3 years. Their faces appeared one by one, each accompanied by quotes from their exit interviews with Alexander. Stories of isolation, harassment, and systematic exclusion filled the auditorium. Several teachers in the audience shifted uncomfortably, recognizing their own failures to intervene. My grandmother wanted me to experience life without the shield of wealth. Maya spoke for the first time, her voice small but growing stronger with each word. She wanted me to understand what it means to struggle, to be judged unfairly, to face adversity. She believed those lessons would make me a better person and a more responsible steward of her legacy. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the podium, but she forced herself to look out at the sea of faces. I learned those lessons. I learned that cruelty doesn't need a reason, that people can be vicious to those they perceive as weaker. But I also learned something my grandmother hoped I would discover. That true character isn't revealed by how you treat people who can help you, but by how you treat people who can't. The auditorium had gone completely silent now. Even Jessica seemed frozen, unable to look away from the girl she tormented, standing confidently on stage. Every morning, I walked through those doors knowing what awaited me. Maya continued, her voice gaining strength. The whispers, the shoves, the casual cruelty disguised as jokes. And every morning, I made a choice to return because my grandmother taught me that running away from hard things doesn't make you stronger. Facing them does. Sarah placed a supportive hand on Maya's shoulder before addressing the crowd again. The Chin Foundation Scholarship Program will not only continue, but expand. We're establishing new protocols to protect students, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff and board members, and an anonymous reporting system for bullying incidents. Additionally, we're creating an independent oversight committee to ensure the program's funds are used as intended. The federal agents had reached Patricia Whitmore now. One of them spoke quietly to her while the other displayed credentials. Patricia's husband, who'd been sitting beside her, looked devastated as he watched his wife being led toward the exit. Jessica burst into tears, the reality of her actions and their consequences finally crashing down on her. As for the students involved in the systematic harassment, Sarah's voice took on a harder edge. Expulsion proceedings have already begun. The video evidence is irrefutable. However, at Maya's request, we're offering an alternative. a restorative justice program that includes genuine accountability, community service, and education about the impact of their actions. The choice is yours. Alexander Hunt stood from his position at the side of the stage, finally revealing his true role. I've been documenting everything as part of an investigation authorized by Margaret Shun before her death. This wasn't about catching people in wrongdoing. It was about understanding how prejudice and corruption take root in institutions, even prestigious ones. Every person in this room has an opportunity now to be part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem. 3 months later, Maya stood in front of Riverside Prep, but everything had changed. Patricia Whitmore faced criminal charges. Jessica and her accomplices had been expelled. Principal Morrison had resigned. The scholarship program had been expanded and renamed in honor of students who persevered through adversity. Maya had chosen to stay at the school, not out of obligation, but to transform it. With her inheritance now accessible through a managed trust, she'd established new programs to combat bullying and support vulnerable students. Alexander Hunt, revealed to be her late grandmother's most trusted investigator, became head of school security and student welfare. Uncle Robert received a generous trust for his genuine care during Maya's darkest days. As Maya climbed those same marble stairs where she'd once fallen, she wasn't the same frightened girl. She was a survivor who'd turned her pain into purpose, proving that true strength isn't about wealth or status. It's about character. And this time, when she reached the top, she wasn't alone. Dozens of students who'd once suffered in silence now walked beside her, ready to build something better together. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting rainbow patterns across the polished marble that had once been the scene of her worst humiliation. Maya paused halfway up, her hand resting on the banister, and allowed herself a moment to remember. The fear, the pain, the loneliness, they were all part of her story now, chapters that had shaped who she'd become rather than defining her limits. Behind her walked Marcus, a scholarship student from the Bronx who'd been ready to drop out before the assembly. He'd suffered in silence for 2 years, convinced that speaking up would only make things worse. Now he served as president of the newly formed Student Advocacy Council, a group Maya had created to give voice to those who'd previously had none. Beside him was Lily, whose parents worked 3 jobs between them to supplement her partial scholarship. She'd been one of Patricia's targets, subjected to rumors and social exclusion until she'd nearly had a breakdown. The new principal, Dr. Elena Martinez, had been handpicked by Sarah Chun and the Reformed Board of Directors. She was a former scholarship student herself, someone who understood both the challenges and the potential that programs like this represented. Her first act had been to institute mandatory empathy training for all students and staff, followed by the creation of a peer mentoring system that paired students across economic backgrounds. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Robert. "Proud of you, kiddo. Your grandmother would be too. Don't forget we're celebrating your first board meeting tonight with your favorite dumplings." She smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. Robert still lived in a modest apartment, though he no longer worked double shifts at the warehouse. Instead, he'd become Maya's advisor and confidant, helping her navigate the complexities of wealth while staying grounded in the values Margaret had wanted her to embrace. As they reached the top of the staircase, Maya noticed something new. A plaque had been installed on the wall, bronze with elegant engraving. It read, "The Margaret Shun Memorial Staircase, a reminder that how we rise after falling defines us more than the fall itself." Below it were the names of every scholarship student who'd walked these halls, including the 5 who'd left before their time. Maya had insisted their names be included, turning their pain into recognition and their departure into a promise that things would be different. The hallway bustled with activity, but it felt different now. Students from all backgrounds mingled freely, the invisible walls of economic segregation beginning to crumble. Maya watched as a girl in a designer outfit helped another student carry books, laughing together about a shared class project. This simple scene would have been impossible 3 months ago. Jessica's younger sister, Emily, approached hesitantly from a classroom doorway. She was in 7th grade, and while she hadn't been directly involved in the bullying, she carried the weight of her family's shame. Maya had specifically requested that Emily be allowed to stay at Riverside Prep, believing that children shouldn't be punished for their parents' crimes or their siblings' mistakes. "Maya," Emily said softly, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. For not speaking up when I should have. For being scared of my sister and what she might do if I defended you." Maya surprised herself by reaching out and squeezing Emily's hand. Forgiveness, she'd learned, wasn't about forgetting or excusing harm. It was about refusing to let bitterness poison your future. "Thank you for saying that. And Emily, you're not responsible for what Jessica did. You're only responsible for who you choose to be from this moment forward." The younger girl's face crumpled with relief, and she nodded vigorously before hurrying back to class. Alexander appeared from around the corner, a tablet in hand showing the security feeds he now monitored with genuine authority. Since taking his official position, he'd implemented a comprehensive safety system that protected without surveilling, creating spaces where students felt secure enough to report problems before they escalated. "Morning assembly in 10 minutes, he reminded Maya gently. "You're giving the keynote about the new mentorship initiative." Maya took a deep breath. Public speaking still terrified her, but she'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. Today she would announce the expansion of the scholarship program to 3 more schools, funded entirely by her trust. She would talk about her grandmother's vision of education as an equalizer, a bridge rather than a barrier between different worlds. As she walked toward the auditorium with her growing circle of friends and allies, Maya glanced back one final time at those stairs. They no longer represented her lowest moment. Now, they symbolized her journey upward, the climb that had transformed a frightened 8-year-old into a young leader determined to create change. Margaret Shun had given her granddaughter many gifts: wealth, opportunity, education, but the greatest gift had been the hardship itself, the struggle that revealed Maya's true strength. And that strength, Maya had discovered, grew exponentially when shared with others who understood the weight of adversity and the power of rising together. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.